One teacher said to me, little black girls from Balham don't become judges. As a very young child, I wanted to be a lawyer. Also, I saw that lawyers really were at the forefront of justice and rights.
Your most recent role was a Standard Chartered. You decided to leave about a year ago. What have you been doing since?
I'd always said to myself when I left the World Bank that I only want to spend 3 or 4 years back in-house because
Dr. Sandie Okoro OBE is the Chancellor of the University of Birmingham and former Group General Counsel at Standard Chartered Bank. With previous extensive experience as Senior Vice President and General Counsel at the World Bank, she has spent her career leading efforts in diversity, inclusion and international finance.
the more diversity, equity, inclusion you have, the more excellence you have, the better team you have. The most diverse team I've ever had was at the World Bank, because as I say, they deliberately draw in from different backgrounds.
What do you think makes a successful GC get jobs like the World Bank and Standard Chartered?
So one of the things it isn't is technical skills. Technical skills get you to the point where people are looking at you. But at that point, when you're looking to be a GC, that's leadership. It's not about your technical skills anymore.
Welcome to Beyond Billables, lessons from top law firm partners, the podcast where renowned and well-known senior legal practitioners reveal the secrets of their success. I'm Stephen Rodney, founder of Integrate Coaching, where we produce tailor-made lateral integration programs for partners joining new firms, and formerly co-founder of Fox Rodney Search. I'm really delighted today that we are joined by a very special guest, Dr. Sandie Okoro OBE, currently Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, and in fact the first female Chancellor in that university's esteemed 125-year history, and formerly Group General Counsel of the Standard Chartered Group, and previously to that, General Counsel of the World Bank. Sandie and I were actually at university together studying law and politics only a few years ago. So we go back a long way. And so a very warm welcome to you, Sandie. And depending on how this goes, I may or may not reveal some proper uni secrets about you later on.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's great to be here.
Good. So perhaps we can start off, as I often do, by just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey to becoming a lawyer, and then your decision to focus on in-house work and your GC journey and where you're at now.
Yeah, that's quite a lot. I'm always happy to talk about that. And yes, great times at university. I remember us doing law politics together. So as a very young child, I wanted to be a lawyer. I originally saw a TV program that you might remember, maybe other viewers might not, called Crown Court.
Oh yeah, I just
And
remember
you remember
that.
Crown Court?
1:30 in
That's
the
right.
afternoon, I think.
That's right. I used to come home for lunch from
Yes,
school,
so
so I used to
I think I
eat
did
my
as well.
sandwich and watch Crown Court, and it made me want to be a judge. And of course, you know, there's a route to that, which is being a lawyer. But I just had it in my brain. I wanted to be that, and I wouldn't say I was exactly encouraged by my teachers. Indeed, one teacher said to me, "Little black girls from Balham don't become judges." But that was a different time. And also I saw that lawyers really were at the forefront of justice and rights. And at that point, apartheid still existed in South Africa. And you saw lots of lawyers fighting so people could have rights and fighting for justice. And that's what I wanted to be. And originally my aim was to be a civil rights lawyer because of what I saw. To be fair, I don't know about you, but I didn't see many people like me as lawyers being represented as such. It's a different case now when you look at the arts and media and everything else like that, but I didn't see it. But that didn't put me off wanting to be one. So that's the origins, and I never let that go. I've always wanted to be a lawyer since then. And then, like you, like many other people, you go through the academic side and you have to nail that, you know, before you even get to dream of other things.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was getting through my academics and going to a good university to do that, because I realized that would be important. But I was fixated on being a barrister. I did qualify as a barrister. I also qualified as solicitor. So I was qualified in both jurisdictions, well, both disciplines rather. And my interesting break from tradition was that I did my well, what was then called your articles, training contract, and Big Bang happened in the city. And at that point, suddenly almost twice as many in-house lawyers were required. And at that point, being an in-house lawyer was not a real lawyer,
No.
you know.
Yeah,
But
I
of
remember.
course, yeah, remember that? Yes, yes. It's very different now, but that was not a real lawyer. It had to be in private practice in one of the big city firms. And none of the big city firms, there weren't many people like me, let's put it that way, in the big city firms. It's not the day and age we are in now. So it was very difficult for me to get into any of those firms. It was really or virtually impossible. So, but in-house was a different ball game. So I thought I'd try in-house. And my first job in-house was at Schroders. I ended up being there for 17 years and had a fantastic career there. And as they say, the rest is history. And that's how it kind of started. So Malcolm Gladwell writes this great book, Outliers. And I think I was kind of one of those outliers where I was one of the first kind of in-house in asset management after Big Bang when they split the merchant banks from the investment. So I learned it from the ground up. So that's the beginning of that
Yeah.
story.
Okay. So then we move forward, and obviously your most recent role was a Standard Chartered, where I understand you haven't been there. You decided to leave about a year ago. So
Yes,
what have
that's
you
right.
been doing?
Yes.
What was the reasons behind that, and what have you been doing since?
Well, I'd always said to myself when I left the World Bank in 22 that I only wanted to spend, 3 or 4 years, back in-house, if at all, actually, because I wanted to go and do something different while I still had a lot of runway in my career. But the job at Standard Chartered was a sort of glass ceiling shattering one. And it was, so I couldn't not take that, particularly to be a role model to other women like myself, when it comes to seeing women like me in positions like that. So I always had put a time limit on it for myself anyway. And also, you get to a point in your career where you think, I now want to do something very, very different, right? And I want to take some time out to do something. And I had nothing really scary, but a sort of a mildish health issue that made me sit up and think, maybe I need to slow down a little bit. And maybe I need to now, if I'm going to refocus at all, now's the time to do it. So that's what I did. So I took some time out to think about that. And during at the same time, Birmingham, rather surprisingly, but rather wonderfully, knocked on the door and asked me whether I would be Chancellor. And I thought, wow, yes, my old university, first female Chancellor, how can you say no? And going back to a patch that was really familiar. And my mum studied nursing at QE as well, the medical school there. My son was studying there at the time. So 3 generations going through. So real attachment to Birmingham. And I've always loved mentoring. I've always loved, being sort of a career coach when people ask me to do things. And my son came up with this idea. He said, Mum, there are very few people like you talking to Gen Z about their career, about life advice on social media. Why don't we start doing that? So that's what I started doing. I call them my pep talks, and my son films them and posts them and everything. So we've got a little family business going. But for me, I love it because it's an ability to do this for free. It democratizes all of this on social media. You can give your advice to a number of people, across the world. If they want to look at it, fine. If they don't, fine. But it's that democratization that I love about social media, that I can do this mentoring, I can do this sort of pep talking for free, and anyone who has a phone can watch it. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. Of course, I can do separate one-to-ones as arranged, but not everybody has access. And access is one of the key things, I think, Steve, in this, that when I was growing up, and I'm sure the same for you, we didn't necessarily have access to these people. But now
No.
through social media, you can have access to people who've been successful. They can tell you and demystify all of this. So that's what I'm doing. I'm now a pep talker on TikTok and Instagram.
I think that's amazing that you're doing that, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit. I just want to ask you, I mean, when you got the job at the World Bank, I remember hearing about it and thinking, wow, that's really incredible. That's the kind of job I think most people would just think,
Yes.
particularly as it's in Washington, you just think, well, how did that come about? That's what I wanted to ask you.
Well, it was as much as a surprise to me as I think it was to everybody else. A wonderful surprise. So the World Bank was looking for a new GC, obviously, and they had a search firm. Now, the World Bank has to represent the nations that are members of the World Bank, and so the nationality of where people come from in really big jobs is important. So they want to make sure there is a good spread. So the lady who had done the role before me was French, so they were looking for somebody else who, from a different jurisdiction, and they'd never had a Brit do the role. So I'm not saying they were specifically looking for a Brit, but it helped that I was a Brit. So they started looking for lawyers in the UK. And I had no experience of the UN, international law, none of that. I was in finance. But at least that was sort of like in an adjacent kind of finance banking, even though it's development finance. So there were many, many layers to that role that were very, very different to the way you normally go for a role. It's very much a leadership position
Right.
because there is no governing law or regulation in relation to it's all internal. So you've got to, you can't know that unless you've worked there. So there was no expectation that you'd be an expert in a particular jurisdiction or whatever. But having known a particular jurisdiction and having the expertise that I had was useful. So simply a headhunter knocked on the door. As they do,
As
you know, they say, do you know anyone who would be interested? You never say, are you interested? Do you know anyone who would be interested? And I said, I know absolutely no one. Goodbye. I thought, who can do that role? And then I thought, who could do that role? I said, I don't know anyone who could do that role. And I put the phone down. And then
Oh, really?
2 or 3 weeks later, I thought, what am I doing? Let me put my name in the hat. And if they choose me, then they choose me. And it's their choice. So why am I to rule myself out? Because I think I haven't got this experience. I can't do that. It's living in Washington, D.C. This is too big. And I went through a very extensive process of interviews.
I bet you did.
I did, including with Jim Kim, who was president of the World Bank at the time. Very extensive interviews and vetting. And I got the role.
Okay, so it was the normal traditional headhunting route. It's funny, I was laughing to myself as you said, they always ring up and say, do you know anyone? It's interesting, in private practice, you don't really do that, because the lawyers in private practice generally are much bigger headed. Whoops, maybe I shouldn't have said that, as they're all on my podcast. But they are, and have maybe slightly bigger egos. So you kind of ring them up, say, we really want you. But in the house, yes, you definitely do that.
You definitely do that, don't you?
You
All the
definitely
time.
do that.
Do you know anyone?
Yes. Yes.
And then after a while, you realize they mean, are you interested? It's code for are you interested?
Yes.
For that. But as I say, with the World Bank, it was really interesting because there were different layers to that. I was completely headhunted, blind, and went through the process. But sometimes with some roles, people are some countries will be putting their own people forward for the most senior ones at the World Bank. So it's a very different kind of role, but everything is done through headhunters. And but it was one of the best jobs I've ever done. I had the most fantastic team. It was an amazing 5 years, the last 2 of which were during COVID. So a challenge as well. But absolutely wonderful. And it shows you that you're never too late in life to learn something new. So I learned all about international law, development finance, everything, hit the ground running. But as I say, that was a real leadership position.
Okay. So going on from that and looking at your experience, what do you think makes a successful GC? How do you think your skills have made you one of those, so you could get jobs like the World Bank and Standard Chartered?
Well, I think this is a really interesting question. So one of the things it isn't is technical skills. And this is where people kind of get this a little bit wrong. Technical skills get you to the point where people are looking at you.
Yes.
Because you've had some technical skills. That's why you've got so far in your career, etc. But at that point, when you're looking to be a GC, that's leadership. It's not about your technical skills anymore. right? Because that's going to be your team. You're going to rely on your team for those technical skills. And my role at the World Bank was a real example of that. I was going to lead a team of several hundred people scattered across the globe for whom I had no technical expertise whatsoever as far as they were concerned, right? But they knew I had technical expertise in something, and you know the value of that, and you know what it is you don't know. Let's put it that way. So I really learned by doing that leapfrog, more like giant leapfrog actually, to the
Yes.
World Bank, that it isn't about technical expertise. Leadership is about authenticity. And so being a GC is a leader, let's say there, right?
Yeah.
It's not being a technical lawyer. You're part of that leadership team. It's about being authentic, being the real you. It's about having courage because you have to make the decisions other people are not prepared to make or willing to make. It's about vulnerability. It's particularly, I mean, my team said they were really pleased when I walked in. I didn't pretend to know everything. I said, I'm going to rely on you because you know, and I'm going to learn from you. And that makes you vulnerable as a leader. But that was a sigh of relief for them that I wasn't going to come in trying to pretend I knew everything when I didn't. So vulnerability, kindness is really very important, right? Because you're going to have a whole team that are looking to you. And sometimes you have to make very tough decisions, but that doesn't mean you can't do that in a kind way. So kindness and empathy, really, really important. So none of these things are, and having a vision for the future, not being afraid of the future and not being afraid of what's coming and being able to live in the future a bit, I think is really important. So those skills are the skills that I think that you need. If you're just going in with the technical ability, it won't work.
It's really interesting, actually, because I recorded a podcast this morning with a partner whose first thing when I said, what makes a successful partner, said, good technical skills. And I kind of agree with that. Although
That's for a
actually,
partner. That's why you're going to the law firm. Absolutely.
Although I do actually wonder whether, I mean, I won't name him, but a well-known senior partner who's not in law firm anymore. I remember who I knew pretty well. He said to me, actually, he knew very early on he wasn't a great technical lawyer. That he knew that he was very good with clients.
Yes.
And so he thought, well, I can find good technical lawyers to actually help me.
Exactly.
And there aren't actually that many people who are good leaders and good with clients. So it's interesting what you say about that, and I tend to agree with you. Do you think now what would it have been like to be at the World Bank now in Washington?
Well, you know what? I think it's always one of the most interesting places. It's one of the most interesting legal jobs you could possibly have, right? I think, because you're right in the middle of nearly everything that's going on all the time. Plus, you can make a huge difference as well because you can have huge influence. I think it must be a very difficult and complicated time with everything that is going on. But with all the UN kind of organizations, everything is always approached, no matter what the complexity, no matter how important this is for the world, it is approached with calmness and huge intellectual ability. I think sometimes, and everybody I'm sure would agree with me, that can make things slightly slower because everyone is really thinking it through and is really making sure, because you are in the spotlight, that you're coming to the right conclusion. So that can make the wheels turn a little bit slower. But I think the amazing thing is that brilliance that are in those organizations, and I know that firsthand from the World Bank. People can rest assured that people really know what they're doing when they're making these decisions. People may not like them. People may think they're a little bit behind the times or they're slow to catch up, but they are. A lot of these decisions are behind a lot of things we see going on now. And because the World Bank is key in lending money to its member countries for development, a lot of things that you see when you go to a number of these sort of countries are often funded by the World Bank, and very most of the people in the World Bank are economists, and then a lot are lawyers as well. So there's a lot of that intellect going on addressing these problems. And I think sometimes, if there was a criticism, that you're in an ivory tower looking at these problems in the world. But what I found is that people who are on the ground in the countries are not in an ivory tower. They're really rolling their sleeves up and getting things done. So I think it'd be a very interesting, a very difficult, a very hard time right now with everything going on and all the balancing act that need to be done. But I think if they haven't, these international organizations, these multilateral organizations are needed way more now than they ever have been. And the intellect that's in them, I would say.
And did the organisation speed up at all during the pandemic when things, had to be done quickly? Were you able to get decisions quicker than you normally would, or not?
Everybody always does in a crisis.
Mhm.
Sometimes you need a crisis to everybody, from the individual to a massive organization.
Mm.
In a crisis, everything is sped up because you don't have the luxury of time on your hands. I just happened to be at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. when COVID hit. But what I'm sure of is everyone was in the same position, particularly GCs, because nobody had ever seen this before. No textbook to turn to, no precedent for anything. And you're looking at what everybody else is doing and you're thinking, oh my gosh. And I remember very particularly, we thought we would do an exercise a week before just to check all remote working. When people started to think,
Yes.
there may be a lockdown coming. And I remember saying to my team, right, for this day, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever, we're all going to work from home.
Yep.
And try and make sure you do that and test all your systems and that you've got everything you need. And quite naturally, people were like, oh no, I can't do that this Wednesday because I've got this meeting, I've got that, or whatever. And a week later, complete lockdown. And I don't think the bank opened again for another year, actually, in terms of people there every day.
Mhm.
And it was just amazing. We went from no, we can't do it, and we've got to be in and present to done. And those sorts of decisions, it's amazing how adaptable everybody is really quickly. You slip it back into old habits eventually, but quick decision making on some of the biggest things that you've ever had to make decisions on had to be made. And it wasn't just at the World Bank, it was at
No.
everywhere. So yes, I think it showed people how quickly decisions, can be made
Could
and
be made,
have
yeah.
to be made. And also really who the decision makers are, because that was one of the things that I became very aware of, which was that some people run away from making a decision.
Right. Okay.
Or they need to have 60 people in the room to help them make a decision. And some people are very good. And that's where you see potential leaders emerge, where they run towards the issue to solve it, not run away.
Right. Okay. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I just wanted to ask you, you as well as being awarded 3 honorary doctorates
Yeah.
for your achievements in law and finance and your contribution to the legal profession. I think it was 2024 when you received the OBE for your
Yes.
services to diversity, international finance, recognizing your work for championing diversity, equality and inclusion across the global finance and legal sectors. I think it'd be really interesting to hear a little more about this work and what you're most proud of achieving in that work.
Well, so I have always been a champion of diversity and inclusion, and have always spoken about it before it was the thing to speak about, really. So as soon as I sort of received any sort of profile as a lawyer, as an in-house lawyer, you're asked to speak on panels, etc., and often technical things. And I thought, no, I'm going to talk about how I got here and the challenges I had and how you can find talent in all sorts of places. So I've always been championing that. I've always, even in my sort of extracurricular activities, have made sure that, DE&I is at the forefront of what we're talking about, because it's about excellence. And that's what I've seen in my life. The more diversity, equity, inclusion you have, the more excellence you have, the better team you have, the better decisions you make, because you've got different people coming from different backgrounds. And sometimes when people come from challenging backgrounds, they're amazingly resilient. And that's what you need at a particular point, at a particular time in a team. The most diverse team I've ever had was at the World Bank, because as I say, they deliberately draw in from different backgrounds. You don't need any particular legal jurisdiction, but nearly everybody had a PhD, at least one in my team.
Right.
not an honorary one, a real one. And there were many people, 3 or 4 runs below me in my team, where the governments would ring them up and ask, would they consider being an attorney general?
Wow.
That was a quality of that team that I had. But I've seen that diversity, what it brings to the table when you get everybody from a different background, and you're not just judging someone, you're judging someone on their ability as a lawyer, not the color of their skin or their gender or whatever it is. So I've always been a champion of that, and I've always put in place, made changes to make
Okay.
sure that we can really make that happen. So one of the things that I did while I was at the World Bank, you can never see everything to the end, but I at least started it, was something called Empowering Women Through Balancing the Law.
Okay.
Which was, so the World Bank produced a report called Women, Business and the Law. And what it did, and this wasn't my team, this was another team in the bank, where they produced the most amazing reports, where they were showing the different laws in different countries that held women back in our member countries, right? And it was produced Women, Business and the Law, and it was produced, I think, every 2 or 3 years. And I said, okay, but what are we doing to change these laws? And we started off with empowering Women by Balancing the Law project, where we got a number of different countries and some law firms involved. This is a project that would be never ending, to change each of those laws.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And that
Yeah.
was something I set off, and I think it's still in train now at the World Bank. But instead of looking at thinking, well, this is not good, is it? It's like, well, what are we doing about it? And to be fair, many of these laws were left on the books sort of in the post-colonial world.
Yes.
Whereas, and left behind because there
Yes.
were more important things to do. And it isn't that it was a lack of willingness to change these laws. They just had not been yet addressed. And they did hold women back, And so a really simple one is different retirement ages between men and women, and all sorts of things like that. And a number of, you can imagine all the different ones, but, there's some simpler ones like that, whereas to some more complicated ones across the world. So the idea was to look at that and actually have a project, to change those laws. And this is huge. This is like, how do you reach the sky? But at least have that ambition. So that was one of the things that I did while I was there. And
Wow.
also we did post George Floyd. I set up the anti-racism task force at the bank to look at things that we were doing within ourselves, within our projects, and our policies and procedures, and to see if there was anything latent in there, which was a big project. It's still ongoing. These things don't end, and neither should they. You can't say, "Oh, we
No,
fixed it
we
within 3
fixed
months,"
that,
because if you
yeah.
fixed it within 3 months, why hadn't you fixed it before?
Yeah.
That was something that the president of the World Bank, Mr. Malpass, asked me to do while I was there, and set up that team. So I'm just giving that as an example
Yeah.
of something that
Very interesting.
everywhere I have done, I've been, and even in my sort of charitable sector, when I was on the board of the RSC, I was on their DE&I committee, and we were looking at sort of race neutral casting and everything, which is now the norm. If you think of
It is.
Bridgerton, you
It
think
is.
of other
Yes, I
things
know.
like that, but wasn't at the time.
No, it definitely
And
wasn't. No.
definitely wasn't. And one of the first things that I remember that I was very proud of were production when I was newly on the board at the RSC was the production of Hamlet, where Papa Essiedu played Hamlet, a black Hamlet. And then, of course, that changed a lot of the production around it and who else was cast. But, I remember sitting there watching a preview, and everybody, just within seconds, everybody was like, but we love this because it's well acted.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
You
RSC standing.
You forget very quickly.
You forget very quickly. If it's done really well,
Yes.
then the rest of it is smoke.
Yes.
Because what you want is you want to be entertained, you want to see. And so I've always been, a long answer to a very short question, Steve, but I've always been involved in these things and taken it really seriously. And if an organization I'm attached to doesn't take it very seriously, then I'm out of there.
And without want to ask you to name an organization, has there been an organization you've worked for that hasn't, and you've thought, I'm not staying here?
Well, I think, like with anything, you go there and there are organizations that talk a lot about it, and when you realize it's not quite close to the truth. I think I don't think there is any organization I've worked for or worked with that hasn't wanted to do it better than they are doing it and realize they're lagging behind. None of them have thought we're perfect, we don't need to do anything. But I think sometimes there is, how much willingness is there to actually change when you lift up the bonnet and you think, but you're going to need to address this and address that. And that's the difference, right? And I think that there's what I have found in nearly every single organization, let me put it this way. When I walk in as a senior Black leader, the staff of color will come and tell me things that they feel they couldn't tell anybody else, right? And you see the big gap between what people really feel and what they will pretend they're feeling just to keep the peace, right? And that's an interesting, and that's why you need more senior Black leaders, really, because you can't believe what you're hearing. Oh yeah, we're happy, we think it's great. Most of the time people are not as happy and thinking it's great, and they'll tell you the real issues that they have. And but they won't do that if they're not the senior Black leaders to say that to. And that is what I don't think there's one single organization I work with where I've been a senior leader, people haven't come to say, let me just tell you what some of the challenges we really have on the ground.
I really think that's very insightful. I mean, I remember, it's a long time ago now, but there was a particular law firm we did a lot of work for that I won't name, that were they said they were very hot on diversity in relation to race in particular. And I remember sending them a CV of someone who had an obvious Nigerian name in an area that firm definitely wanted to recruit in. And I sent about 6 or 7 CVs to different firms. But that firm was one that I remember thinking, well, they must interview this person because he's really good. And then they rejected really quickly, and it was all very weird. And I remember thinking, this is all very weird. These rejections have come through much quicker than they should have done, and he's a good candidate. So I said to him after about a month, you know what? I said, we're going to do something a little bit different. It's been a month since you got rejected. I'm going to change your name. I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to call you a number. I'm going to change 1 or 2 other things, and I'm going to resubmit your CV to those 6 firms. And 2 of them, including the one I'm thinking of, who's very hot on diversity, came back and interviewed him, right? And I didn't tell them his name. I remember it really clearly. I said to him, I said, I'm not going to tell them your name until you're actually basically 5 minutes from the meeting.
Right.
And I'll make some excuse up as to why not. So I just don't want, and so, I did that.
Brilliant.
And he got the job.
Brilliant.
And then when he'd got the job and it all been confirmed and he had a start date, I rang up the director of HR, who was really a very nice lady, and very hot on this area. And I told her the story, and she was so dumbfounded.
Yes.
I mean, she said she didn't know what to say. And it turned out, and this is what the interesting thing is, you have these organizations with leaders who talk the talk, but it turned out that there was, as she told me later, there was someone in her team who they realized was racist.
Yes.
And so that person was sifting CVs, and so the CV didn't get past her.
Yes.
Because she basically, this is pre-email days.
Yes.
It got thrown away. And the director of HR said, we've changed our whole process because of this, so that it can't happen. And I remember thinking, this is, people can talk a very good game, but it's actually it's all the way up and down that you have to look at for this to happen. And he became a very successful lawyer there. So it's interesting what you say about all that. And actually, coming back now to talk about leadership, which is, this all relates to the same kind of thing, really. You had pretty unique career. You've worked as a GC and a leader in a lot of sectors, and including now in academia. You've seen a lot of different types of leadership in action. So what for you, what really makes a good leader? Very easy question for me to ask. Probably not so easy to answer, but I thought it's a good question for you
so
to.
It's a good question. So I think that leadership, for leaders I've seen that I've thought have been good leaders. Again, it's going to sound like I'm repeating myself, but I'm not.
No.
The main one is it wasn't about their technical abilities, right? This is the one thing. It wasn't about their technical abilities. Their technical abilities were never in question, but what made them a good leader was not their technical abilities, right? In academia, that might be slightly different because that is all about your technical abilities. But I think certainly in, the industries I've been in, it wasn't about your technical abilities. I think that one of the key ones is sort of that authenticity. They really were themselves. You got exactly what you thought you were going to get. You really felt you could learn something from them. Right? This is the other thing. And I don't mean technical stuff, but just learn how to be strategic, how to approach problems, how to deal with other people and to deal with difficult circumstances. So I think that was kindness was another one. Right? Kindness was another one. I remember one of the greatest leaders I ever came across was a guy called Mark Smith at Schroders when I was at Schroders. And just after I came back from maternity leave, he asked for me to go and work with him particularly.
Right.
Because he remembered me from years back when I first joined after Big Bang, where I was the only person that actually stood up to him and told him he was wrong.
Okay.
Right? And on something, and he was actually wrong on that. And he was trying to pull the wool over my eyes. He didn't realize I could read an architectural map when we were moving offices, and he was trying to put my team in front of where the lift shaft was, and we'd have smaller space. And he was trying to tell, and I said, no, because there's a lift shaft. He said, how do you know there's a lift shaft? There's another story there, and I can tell you that. And I said, because I know how to read these architectural drawings. And he said, okay. And then he asked, because he said, I need people who can tell me I'm wrong and are not afraid to stand up to me. And you were so junior then, I was very impressed because you stuck to your guns. And so when he was looking for people, he said, and I learned so much from him. And I remember I was going through a really, really tough time. And he said to me, Sandie, we're going out for lunch, right? And he'd been to Eton. He was a typical public school educated person in fund management. But he was fantastic. Unfortunately, he's passed away now. But he said to me, we're going out for lunch. I know you're going through a bad time. I'm a typical English bloke that doesn't really know what to do. So we're going to sit there in silence. But you can have anything to eat and drink you want, and I'm paying for it. Because I know you're not. What I just always remember, and I sat there crying, Steve. I was like, he said, I just can't. I don't know how to deal with this, but this is how I know how to deal with it. And this is what we're going to do. You're taking the afternoon off. I'm taking you out for lunch. We're just going to sit here and we can sit here in silence. Don't expect me to say anything else. This is the best I can do right now. and he was absolutely marvelous. And didn't pull any punches, was always Mark, taught me a lot, said to me, gave me some really good tips in my career, was a great mentor. But the things I remember him for was that kindness in that moment and empathy in that moment, right? Recognizing who he was and not trying to be anything other than he was, but also helping me through a difficult time. So those are the great leaders, the ones who, and also I want to say those who gave me an opportunity.
Okay.
When others didn't see that. And others would not have had the guts to do that. And I think Jim Kim at the World Bank was one, because he had the guts to take someone who didn't have any development experience, but because he really wanted a leader. And that kind of worked out. So those, the true leaders are those that I think have courage as well and will take the steps others, are not as brave to take. And one thing if I may just add, there are not that many good leaders out there. There are many people who are leaders, but there are not many good leaders. And I think in my whole career, there have been 3 or 4 that I can look at as really good leaders, and they all seem to have those similar characteristics.
So so you've mentioned those 2 as mentors. What other, who are the other mentors in your career?
Well, I think when I was having my career, there wasn't the term mentor in the same way, right? So really, you were just working alongside these people, and you saw what they did, and you thought, oh, I want to be like you when I grow up, kind of thing. So I definitely think for me, Mark Smith was one in my early days, because it's really the early part of your career was a very, very important one. Another fabulous one that I had was when I was at Barings, and he was the Group General Counsel at Mass Mutual. His name's Mark Roig, who's always been a super supporter of mine. And sometimes he said to me that he thought Barings would be too small for me. and I need to think big in my career.
Mm.
And he would always, and for someone to say that, you know, was,
Yes.
and when I was listed in the power list for the first time, he got loads of copies and he distributed them to the Mass Mutual board saying, look at one of my lawyers. He was big into DE&I as well, because he said he's only had diverse teams and they've been the best teams. Why would he think anything else? He's one who walked the talk and everything else, and always a huge supporter, always go for it. He came when I got an award at the UN, and you know, he was another great one because he was a genuine, authentic leader, and you wanted to learn from him, and his support for DE&I was you know, amazing. So he's another one. And those two at kind of the beginning, Mark Smith right at the beginning of my career before I'd done anything. And then there was Mark Roig when I was GC at Bearings, who really encouraged me to think big and to not think this is, you know, to think I need to go and stretch myself and do bigger roles and I need to do bigger things. And he was very supportive of that.
Okay.
So, I mean, leaders like that are pretty incredible, actually. So, yeah, there have been, you know, one of the good mentors that I've had, who I didn't work with, but was just out there, was a guy called Ken Olisa. So Ken Olisa, he is the Lord Lieutenant of London now, but I sat on a board with him. And he said to me that you need to aim, and this is something I say to other people I mentor, you need to aim for something that is so unachievable that you think you're not going to make it, and stick with that. And then think, because what will happen is you won't ever really kind of achieve that. You'll achieve something alongside it. And he said to me, what was my thing? And I said, oh, I'd like to be the British ambassador to Washington, DC.
All right.
And he said to me, and this is years ago now, this was maybe 10, 12 years ago. And he said to me, well, do you want to give up the city and being in the law and go and work in the civil service? I said, no. And he said, right, okay. So this is not really. However, you might end up, you might end up running the Red Cross or something like that, which is along those lines, right? But where did I end up, Steve? I ended up as general counsel at the World Bank, sitting in Washington, DC, with my diplomatic UN passport. And it wasn't until I was sitting in my office and I thought, oh my goodness, I haven't achieved that, but it's kind of alongside. I'm in DC. I've got diplomatic status. I'm running this. I get the same status as an attorney general or, you know, when I travel abroad. And it's like, wow. So that piece of advice of aiming for something you think is impossible, but what you would really like, and keep it there. So I always say when I mentor people, what are you going to do that's going to put you on the cover of Time magazine?
Okay, well, that's really good. Listen, there was a gap to be ambassador to Washington a few months ago. I think he wasn't in the civil service when they brought him in. But anyway, we won't go into that right now. So sticking with those very interesting traits of leadership, so looking ahead, you know, with the rise of things like AI and other things that are going to happen, do you think future leaders will need different skills to the ones now?
So again, comes back. Clearly with AI, you're going to need less technical skills, right? And maybe particularly in law as well. A lot of the things that we've learnt. And do you remember when we started, we had to go and find cases in the law library.
I
that
remember
first few days, remember? And it's like just those skills of being able to look up a case, because of course we've never done it before. I don't know if you've been to the law library recently, but
I have. I did go to the law library a couple. I know there were no books
left there.
And I nearly. I mean, the really weird thing, I don't know if I told you this when I last saw you, is that, do you remember the librarian, Mary, whatever she was called?
Yes.
For some reason, so I went back there probably 3 years ago with one of my daughters who was thinking of going, and I walked to the law library. For some reason, I kind of went back in my head and thought that Mary, who, when we were there, must have been 50, would sort of still be there, age 130. So I did notice they weren't. But then I did go to somewhere a few weeks ago, actually, where there were there were books. And in
Yeah.
Oxbridge, I went somewhere where there were
Yeah,
books.
yeah,
There were
yeah.
still law books, but
Yeah.
I know what you mean. So yeah, sorry,
So, I
carry on.
mean, those things that if you just
Mhm.
showed it to at that point in time when we started, to someone who knew nothing, they wouldn't be able to look up anything, but we knew how to do it. We were trained to
Yes,
do
we
it.
did.
But now we
Yes.
don't need that. But what we still need and will never disappear are
Mm,
those human skills, right?
mm,
So a
mm,
lot of the things that maybe will disappear in time, how to sort of draft this and know how to do it from your head, right?
mm,
We'll just be, and the use of precedents and being able to find them has just changed from when we were trained, right?
mm.
Because there were I was saying to someone recently, I said we didn't have laptops and stuff at
No.
university. We thought microfiche was amazing, right? But we only had to write all our essays by hand. And someone said to me, but how did you do PowerPoint presentations? I said there were no PowerPoint presentations because there were no laptops, So I think if you just put it into context, it's all helping you improve. And my work at the university as Chancellor, I can see how all of this is fantastic for academia and for teaching, etc., and particularly for some diagnostic work in medicine, etc. So we shouldn't be afraid of it, right? It's just going to speed up what we do and how we do it. I mean, we didn't have, this mobile phone, and we didn't have the way to look things up we can now. But people still get it wrong. You have to think, you have to be trained to be a lawyer, to think like a lawyer, to think through the problems. So I
Yes.
think we're going to have to be more human, is what.
Yeah. No. I'm sure that's right.
More human.
I always remember at university. I mean, I wouldn't like to be at university now for all sorts of reasons, but I always remember one of the law lecturers saying, "Copying out of one book was plagiarism. Copying out of two was research." Right. And I think now
That's a great line, isn't it?
and I always used to, I think now when I hear my children talking who are at university talking about how much, they're all the students are using AI and stuff and how the university's fighting it, I'm thinking, blimey, what a nightmare. It just means actually that I'm sure they're going to just go back to exams. That's easier. And
Yes,
then
yes, yes.
you can't know that. And I actually have to tell you, so those all little anecdotes coming back into my head from university. I was one of the first people, I think, in law. I got my essays typed up. I found
Oh,
one of the
wow.
secretaries because my writing was so rubbish. And
Oh,
I remember thinking, he's got 50 essays to read. He's never going to read mine. He's just going to throw it away. So I've paid someone to type it up. And I was really happy because I got good grades. And I remember thinking
good
it
for
must have,
you.
there's a psychological thing, isn't there? If you
Yes,
can read
yes.
it easily. So all those things, although they're years and years ago, the principles still remain, don't they?
Yes.
In terms
And
of
nobody
how.
now does a handwritten essay.
Of course not. Of course they don't.
Of course
They
they
all tap
don't. So
it out on their laptop as they're sitting.
exactly. And
Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah.
mean that they're smarter than we were or
No.
anything. It's just different.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that with
Mm.
less on the technical memory,
Yep,
recall, how much do you know side of thing to how
yep,
do you apply it?
yep.
Because the one thing AI and computers won't do is the human experience. And law and anything when you've got clients is a very human experience, right? I don't think any client is going to want an avatar advising them. But will they care whether you use the avatar to say, look, oh my gosh, I'm such a technical lawyer. I've got this really, say you're a tax lawyer or something like this. The avatar can say, avatar, help me put this in more simple language for a layman, blah, 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 blah. What's wrong with that?
I have to say, I'm not sure I agree with you, Sandy. I think it depends what kind of client you're talking about. But I think if you take sort of the conveyancing process, I think people would very happily talk to an avatar. If it was less stressful, they could get hold of them more easily. They didn't cause delays. I think those kind of things will take
So
over
I
from
don't disagree
lawyers.
with some things, but I was thinking more sort of like in my industry and the
Yeah, okay.
sort of financial side
Okay.
of things and the litigation side of things.
Litigation, I think, maybe you're
Right?
correct.
You want to be human. You can't, I mean, it doesn't mean that we won't use more technology. I just think we as lawyers, whoever is lawyers, are going to need more human skills with their clients. There could have been a tendency to sit in that ivory tower and hide behind the intellectualism of the law and the mystery of the law and rights, whereas people maybe as clients will come knowing more of their rights. But we've
Yeah.
already seen in conveyancing and will writing and stuff that you often don't have a lawyer
No.
doing that before you have
which is good.
a licensed conveyor or conveyancer or
Conveyancer.
whatever it is.
Mm.
So I think we've seen, so maybe there will be some things
Mm.
that completely disappear.
Yeah.
But I think some of the really hard-edged
Yeah.
stuff. I remember when I was at the World Bank, we went to this university. I think it was called Olisa University. Anyway, it's in Kenya, and it was set up. One of the first ones set up with someone who worked at one of the big tech companies, and he'd set it up. And at that time, it was just to teach sort of tech and IT and all of that. And I remember him saying to me when he was showing us around where we are, and this was back in maybe 2019, where we are right now at technology, as far as the human race is concerned, is like the invention of fire. It's so basic that we as human beings can't get our heads around where this is going. And this was well pre-AI. So I said, does that mean that, everything we do as humans is going to be redundant? He said, no, what we do as humans will become even more important. And one of the most important things will be the art of diplomacy, because he doesn't ever see at this in foreseeable future technology being able to do diplomacy.
No, I think that's very true.
And all the jobs that bring that into play, of which he thought the law was one, and judgment, which he thought the law was one, will not kind of disappear as jobs.
Okay. No, that's
interesting,
that's
huh?
Yeah, no, very interesting. Can I just ask you, because as you know, my focus is on providing integration coaching, mainly for law firm partners moving firms. So just looking at your legal career, how... two parts to the question. How well generally were you integrated when you moved roles? And when you look at people within the organizations you were with, and you look at some people who joined your team that didn't work out, what do you think the sort of couple of reasons that happened was, that they didn't work out?
I think the biggest success to integration at any stage in your career when you move from somewhere else is to spend some time listening. Because it's very easy, incredibly easy to come and go, why are they doing it like this? Why are they doing it like that? And to judge. Actually listen and understand. I think that spending some time, that's where people make mistakes, is they come in and they make a judgment or they take a view very quickly instead of listening and spending some time getting to know people. That's the first one, right? So almost literally moving too fast in a role. Take your time. Get to know the people, get to know the environment, understand the culture of the organization, not what you think the culture of the organization is. And always remember, the first ones in your office are going to be there to moan. You need to, not necessarily like that, but you know what I mean? People who have a grievance or a gripe are going to find you very quickly as a new person because they feel you can help, and maybe you can. But just be aware of that, right? So be skeptical around the first pieces of advice you get from people, how to navigate the institution, right? And work that out for yourself.
Okay.
Always work that out for yourself. It doesn't matter whether they're right or wrong. You need to work out how to navigate the institution for yourself. And where you can go wrong is you don't do that for yourself. You listen to somebody else. So I think those kind of first few weeks of orientation are going to be, very key. The other thing I would say is where people can get it wrong or they can get it right is understanding the relationships and the connections within an organization, which are never obvious at first, and how it really works and who really knows stuff and who really has power and heft. Because it's nothing to do with job titles, really. Sometimes, obviously, but I mean, understanding those people who really have influence, who really can make things happen if you want to make things, is very important. And that takes time to find out as well. So that adaptation piece, do not think the organization is going to adapt to you. You are going to adapt to it.
Okay. No, those are two very good pieces of advice. So we're moving to the end, Sandie.
Already?
I know. Time flies when you're having fun. So if you had your time again, would you do anything differently as a GC lawyer? leader general up until now?
Do you know, I think there are always lots of things, like lots of individual things we do recently differently, and you cover your eyes and go, I don't know why I did that. And I would love to go back in time and change that. But I think overall, Steve, what I would say is I wish I would have worried less about things, right? So if we go, let's go to where this conversation started about what I wanted to do. I remember when, and as I say, things were, that was a past thing. People did things differently then. One of the things was, you're going to be a Black female lawyer. How are your clients going to feel about having a Black, how are, whatever it is, in-house, that was never the issue. That was never, ever the issue. Right? If you're good enough, people
If you're
really
good,
don't
no
care.
one cares. No, I
Right?
agree.
No one cares. But everybody's, so that's what I mean worrying less, is that that's why I'm running towards AI and all of this. All the things you think are going to be a problem are not going to be a problem. Right? They're just little hiccups on the way that will smooth themselves out because we get used to them. Right? The kind of things you actually face are sort of sexism, harassment, other sorts of things in the environment you're in. Around you. It was never customers or clients or whatever. They just want the best person for the job and they're willing to pay for that, right? So it was often other things. So the things that I used to worry about never came to kind of pass, right? And then the world changes, and things you never even thought you might be discussing as an issue become an issue. And if so, when you and I were growing up, thankfully lots was changing around homophobia and everything else like that. It was really changing. We grew up in a generation where it didn't understand that. Now we've got a lot of issues around gender identity, right? Which was not a conversation that ever existed. There were only two genders now it's very different. But who would have predicted that? Who would have predicted this could now be an issue that's going to lead to lots of legal issues, etc., etc., because it wasn't. So all the things that you used to worry about, think, I need a real expertise in this, I need to do this or that, things change. The world moves really quite fast, and it moves at a generational speed. And one of the things I'm doing on my TikTok talks, I've just done one today, was how
tell us what how do people find your TikTok talks?
So Dr. Sandie Okoro OBE on TikTok and on Instagram.
Okay.
And my pep talk today was how baby boomers can talk to Gen Z, right? And because it's a very different generational divide. And the things we would strive for are very different. They've got a lot of side hustles going on, Gen Z, right? Where we had just one, and we're going to be a lawyer and that's going to be it, So my side hustle now is my TikToks and my Instagram and mentoring and other things I've set up, which is my own sort of business as well. But I think these sorts of things are very, very different now. So I just wish I had worried less about the future and just enjoyed life more, because it will all pan out okay in the end.
And actually, Sandie, is there anything else you're up to apart from the TikTok?
Oh, well, many different things. But one of the most interesting things I'm doing is I'm writing a book on leadership from my perspective and my experience. There are very few people, I think, who've been in my unicorn position to write a book on that. So I'm busy doing that.
Excellent.
There's something like, and I say this in my graduation talks, 90% of what we worry about will never happen.
Yes.
It just won't happen.
Yes.
The remaining 10%, 5% of which, if it does happen, we'll be able to deal with it and surprise ourselves. And that last 5%, we can't do anything about it anyway. So really, we spend nearly 90% of our time worrying about 5% of stuff. So I would have just enjoyed myself more. I would have, not that I didn't enjoy myself, don't get me wrong, but I would have just relaxed more. I would have eased into it. I've spent less time worrying about the future and how I would achieve this and that, and sat back and enjoyed it a little bit more.
Well, there we are. That's what great advice, and I think that would apply to me as well.
Nearly
Actually,
anything.
on stuff, particularly when you are a leader, just realizing that actually a lot of things do sort of sort themselves out without after you've worried about them for days and days and days. They kind of a lot of them do
Yeah.
sort themselves out. So I think what you're saying is worrying less is definitely resonates with me, and I'm sure will resonate with a lot of our audience. So I just want to thank you, Sandie, for being our guest on Beyond Billables, Lessons from Top Law Firm Partners, where we've had you as a GC and leader on, and it's been absolutely fascinating to hear from you and what makes a successful GC and a leader. And I'm sure law firm partners and other GCs will be very interested to hear what you say. So we're very grateful and glad you made the time to speak to us today.
Great.
And so to everyone, please join us on our next episode of Beyond Billables, Lessons from Top Law Firm Partners, where we'll have someone else who will share the secrets of their success. See you next time.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve.